My stepson stole my car and called me a gold digger, so I exposed his father's financial secrets. Now, their broken bond is beyond repair. Background: my husband Thomas and I have been together for 5 years, married for 2. He has a 19-year-old son, Rob, from his first marriage. Tragically, his first wife passed away about 5 years before we met. Rob was only 9 when he lost his mother, and it affected him deeply. He struggled to cope, and as he got older, his behavior became increasingly difficult. When I first met Rob, he was around 13 or 14, and the experience was far from welcoming. He made it clear from the outset that he saw me as an intruder. He told me outright that I could never replace his mother, a role I had no intention of filling, and that he would never accept me as part of their family. I genuinely tried to build a relationship with him, but Rob was determined to make things as unpleasant as possible for me, likely hoping I'd give up and leave. I discussed the situation with Thomas and suggested therapy to help Rob work through his feelings, but Thomas explained they'd already tried various approaches without success. Rob, it seemed, had no interest in making progress. After his wife's death, Thomas hadn't seriously considered dating anyone for a long time. I was the first person he took seriously since losing her. He'd gone on a couple of casual dates before meeting me, but I was the only one he pursued further. From the start, Thomas was upfront about everything, including the challenges with Rob. He warned me that his son would likely be unwelcoming and needed time to process his grief, which is why we took things slowly before I was introduced to the family. We dated for a year before Thomas brought me into his home. Even then, Rob's hostility was immediate and unrelenting. Over the next few years, he frequently lashed out, throwing tantrums and being openly rude. I tried my best to be patient and understanding, but his behavior wore me down. Eventually, I decided to disengage, focusing my energy elsewhere rather than fighting with him. Despite my best efforts, I repeatedly told Thomas he needed to address Rob's behavior. Thomas would occasionally reprimand him, but the effects never lasted. Rob always reverted to his usual hostility. Despite all of this, I loved Thomas deeply and wanted to make our relationship work, which is why I stayed for nearly 6 years, enduring his leniency toward Rob's behavior. But what recently happened pushed me beyond my limit. About 3 years ago, Thomas proposed to me, and I accepted. Around the same time, he also started a new business. Unfortunately, the venture hasn't been successful. Over the years, he's been struggling to keep it afloat, and, financially, things have been difficult. I allowed him to try his business for almost 3 years because it was his passion project, but when it still wasn't taking off, I tried to tell him that maybe it was time to move on to better things or go back to his job because this clearly wasn't working for him. I started telling him to give up his business and do something else recently, just a few months ago, since we've mostly been living off my money for the past 3 years. I was worried because I couldn't afford to support our family solely on my income, as that would leave very little for me in the future when I want to retire. So I had been trying to gently push Thomas in the right direction, but he was being very stubborn and kept saying he just needed a little more time to work on his business model and kept finding excuses not to give up. I really wanted to be understanding, but it was becoming impossible to continue supporting him, knowing this wasn't working. Recently, we have been arguing a lot about this, and I guess at some point his son overheard what we were talking about and concluded that I was a gold digger for telling Thomas to sell his business to any interested buyer and go back to his job so we could earn more money. I found it very insulting because the last thing I am is a gold digger. I've always been independent and couldn't stand the insinuation that I had been living off my husband's money when in reality it had been the other way around. I wanted to correct Rob when he started calling me a gold digger, because this had already come up a couple of weeks ago when I asked him to do some chores, and he told me he wasn't going to take orders from a gold digger with no self-respect or dignity. When I asked him what he meant by that, because I was clearly horrified, he explained. But before I could correct him, Thomas intervened and broke up the fight. Then he pulled me aside and told me not to say anything to his son, because Rob didn't know that we had been living off my money for so long. Thomas wanted to preserve his image in front of his son, because it would be very embarrassing for him to admit that he was having financial difficulties as a father. It would be humiliating for him to show his son how far he had fallen. Thomas practically begged me not to tell Rob the truth, so I agreed. However, I had to pay the price for that, because after that day, things started to get more difficult for me. Now that Rob believed I was a gold digger, he kept using it against me, and it was very tempting to tell him the truth. But I had to think of Thomas and remain silent for his sake. Rob had come home for his winter break, and I knew he would be leaving in a couple of weeks, so I just had to tolerate him for a short time. Since I had already endured his behavior for so many years, I didn't think it would be too difficult. But I guess this time Rob was planning to make things much harder for me. A few days ago he decided to take my car without my permission and crashed it, just before I was about to leave for a very important meeting that I had been talking about for days. I usually leave for work around 9 in the morning, but that day I had a meeting with a very important client, and planned to leave much earlier, as I didn't want to be late. I am truly grateful that I planned ahead, because I was ready to leave quite early. However, Rob had gotten ready even earlier, and when I went out to check on my car, I saw that there was a huge dent on the hood, and the sides were scratched. I was clearly devastated, and what upset me even more was that Rob was standing next to the car, with the keys in his hand, and a proud smile on his face, as if he thought he had done something great. When I saw him and what he had done to the car, I completely lost my mind and started yelling at him. Normally I'm not a violent person, but that day, I just lost control and ended up slapping Rob in the face. Not that I regret it. He tried to push me, but by then Thomas had come out of the house, and had pieced things together, so he was able to hold Rob back before he could do anything else. I was crying because, obviously, I couldn't take the car to the meeting now, and would have to take a taxi. Although that wasn't so bad, my car had been one of the first purchases I made with my own money and was quite significant to me. Besides, taking a taxi to such an important meeting for my career with a high-profile client seemed a bit odd. I was really upset about what had just happened, as anyone would be. However, Rob didn't seem to regret anything. Instead, he was yelling at me, while his father tried to hold him back, telling me that this should show me my place. He thought I had too much arrogance for someone who depended on her husband to fund her lifestyle, and he found it laughable that I had been talking about this important meeting for days, even though he knew that at the end of the day, I would be living off my husband's money. Then he started yelling at me, saying that this was my lesson for trying to force his father to sell his business, just so I could have more money for myself. He kicked my car again, called me a gold digger, and spat on the ground, even though Thomas was doing his best to hold him back. That's when I decided that I couldn't hide the truth any longer for Thomas's sake, and I told him everything. I tried to rub the truth in his face and be as unpleasant as I could because I felt he deserved it. I didn't even care that he was only 19 years old, and that I was an adult woman arguing with him at that moment. I just wanted to hurt him. I told him how his father's business had been in ruins for the past 3 years, and that I was the one who had been carrying their dead weight, but instead of being grateful, he had tried to sabotage me. I also told him that I was the one who had been paying for his college tuition so far, and although his father had promised to pay me back as soon as he could, it didn't matter because I was the one doing it at the time. Therefore, he had no right to speak to me like that or call me a gold digger because, if anything, they were the ones who needed the gold, not me. I could see on his face that he was completely shocked and practically frozen in place, just like Thomas. Then I wiped away my tears and started to leave while I booked a taxi to go to the meeting. I didn't even turn around because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Fortunately, the meeting went well because I had left quite early and arrived on time. I had enough time to compose myself and put on a professional face, and my decision to take a taxi instead of my own car didn't seem like a big deal, so it was probably just in my head. When I got back home, I saw that my car was still in the same position, so I called a friend who has a car repair shop and asked him to take care of it. I don't know why, but just seeing my car in that state broke my heart once again, and I decided not to go into the house. I took another taxi and went directly to a nearby hotel, and I haven't been back home since. The state of my car made me realize how much disrespect I had suffered in my own home, all because Thomas couldn't stand up to his son. I had had enough. After this, there was no way I could go back to that house and try to fix things with them because they definitely didn't deserve it. That day, I kept hoping that Thomas would at least call me to see how I was after I returned from my meeting and went to the hotel, but that didn't happen either. The next day, when I woke up after a night of crying myself to sleep, I decided that I couldn't keep living with these people, and that love obviously wasn't enough to sustain a relationship, so I decided to call my lawyer and told him that I wanted to file for divorce. Then I called my brother and asked him to go to my house, pack up certain things, and bring them to me because I didn't even want to see Thomas or Rob. I explained the situation to him as well, and he helped by bringing me my things. I guess when he went to my house instead of me to pick up my things, Thomas realized that I wasn't planning to come back home anytime soon. He and his son started bombarding my phone with calls and text messages. I muted all notifications from them because I didn't want to think about them, but I didn't block them because I wanted to know what they had to say. Before I went to sleep, when I finally decided to check the messages they had sent me, I realized that they were only trying to apologize and say that they were willing to fix things, but that all I had to do was come back and talk to them once more. I expected that from Thomas, but the fact that even Rob was apologizing and trying to say that he was willing to apologize and change as a person really surprised me. However, I wasn't going to be fooled so easily, because it was evident to me that they were only contacting me because they needed me to be there for them. If Thomas had truly regretted it, he would have contacted me the same day and apologized for everything. He wouldn't have had to wait until he realized I wasn't coming back home to apologize. In fact, even when I didn't come back that day, he didn't contact me. Only when my brother came to pick up my things did he feel the need to reach out to me. So his apology seemed very empty and insignificant to me. As for Rob, I didn't even need to think twice about why he was apologizing to me. I realized he needed a way to pay for his college, and up until now, I was the one who had been paying for his tuition. Obviously, he needed my help even now, as he still had 2 years left to graduate. Given Thomas's financial situation, I'm his only hope. Being the spoiled brat that he is, I'm sure it never even occurred to him that he could have worked during college like most of us, or taken out a student loan. I was very disappointed, even though they had apologized, because I knew those apologies didn't mean anything, and they were only saying them because it was convenient. It took me a long time to realize it, but I finally came to the conclusion that I definitely loved Thomas much more than he loved me, and much more than he deserved. But it was time for me to prioritize myself and let him go, because for the past 6 years, all he had done was make false promises and tell me that he was going to fix things with me and Rob. I had only allowed it until now, because I would just tell Rob to be better, but there were never any real consequences for his actions. That's why eventually Rob found the audacity to do something like this, and actually expect to get away with it. Anyway, I spoke with my lawyer about the divorce, and I also told him I want to file a lawsuit against them because I want them to pay for the damage they've caused me. So after reading those messages and realizing how fake their apologies were, I decided to reply to Thomas and tell him that I was going ahead with the divorce and that there was nothing he could do to stop me because I had waited long enough for them to change. But since that wasn't going to happen, I wasn't going to wait any longer and allow them to disrespect me over and over again. The next morning, I woke up to another 100 messages from Thomas begging me not to leave and telling me he was willing to do whatever it took to make me stay. He had also tried to call me several times during the night, but since I was asleep and his notifications silenced, I didn't know. At that moment, I started to feel really annoyed because, in his messages, he was acting as if he was really willing to do whatever it took. I knew he was just saying those things for the sake of it because he had said them many times before. I had let myself be fooled before. But this time, I decided to tell him I would give him an ultimatum. If he was willing to make things work on my terms, then maybe I would come back. In reality, I had no intention of going back because I had made my decision with a lot of effort and I wasn't going to back down, but I just wanted to see what he would say about it. So I replied and told him that I would be willing to consider couples therapy and staying with him if he promised never to speak to his son again and completely cut him out of his life. I told him that was the only solution, and if he was willing to do that, then we could talk, but otherwise I would go ahead with the divorce. So that was my ultimatum. And a couple of hours later, he sent me another message saying he didn't know what to tell me because Rob only had him, but he also loved me and didn't want to give up on our marriage. So I had put him in a really difficult situation and he needed time to think. He was begging me not to proceed with the divorce, but I told him that the fact that he was even considering this meant that neither I nor Rob was that important to him, and since he couldn't be loyal to either of us, it would be better for me to walk away completely and make things easier for him. Then I guess he realized I had no real intention of going back to him and he started accusing me of trying to mess with his mind. His tone really annoyed me. So I decided to take screenshots of that conversation and send them to Rob. Then, I turned off my phone because I didn't want to interact with either of them after that. It's been 2 days since then, and Thomas has been trying in every possible way to get in touch with me because, after I sent the screenshots to Rob, he left the house. He felt insulted by the fact that his father was even considering cutting ties with him to make the marriage work. So Thomas has been quite upset with both of us and is blaming me for creating this situation, telling me I'm responsible for his predicament right now, and has been cursing at me. But I don't particularly feel bad about it. For the last 6 years, he had been constantly enabling his son and allowing him to disrespect me over and over again, and I thought this was a very small way to get back at him. Compared to what I'd been through, this is practically nothing. He has been claiming that he had done his best to balance Rob and me and had always tried to keep both of us happy. But that's not true. I was never happy anyway. I don't particularly feel bad about what I did, but my brother thinks I should have let it go, instead of trying to create a rift between them. He told me it wasn't worth it and that revenge isn't something he generally encourages. I'm confused about whether I should feel bad about this or not, and I need people to validate my decision right now. So, am I the bad one for deliberately creating drama between my future ex-husband and his son, who has always hated me? Edit. I stayed with him because I loved him, guys. When you love someone, it allows you to be manipulated, and it took me a long time to realize that maybe he didn't love me as much as I loved him. I think it's pretty common for people to do this when they're trying to take advantage of you, and that's exactly what happened to me, and I'm not going to let myself be shamed for it. There's a difference between someone who is a doormat voluntarily and someone like me, who has been manipulated in the name of love. I was making sacrifices to make my relationship work, and it took me a long time to realize that I was the only one doing so, which wasn't fair to me. I can understand that people might think I'm a fool for staying with him for so long, but I don't care. What's important is that I finally found the courage and strength to leave him, so I'm definitely not going to let myself be shamed. I made a mistake like many people do, and I think that's completely okay. So thank you to everyone who has been kind to me, and to those who haven't been as kind, I don't care. Update 1. Thank you so much to everyone who commented and supported me. Obviously, I'm going ahead with the divorce, and yesterday, Thomas received the divorce papers. I don't think he's going to contest them, but I think it might be the case because I've requested quite a high amount in compensation, given that he's been living off my expenses for the last 3 years, and I'd like him to pay all that back. I don't think, given his current financial situation, he's going to be willing to pay me back, but no worries, we can always make it a long-term payment. Anyway, that's not a concern right now, we'll deal with all of that during our mediation sessions if he tries to impose his own terms. Some people have been worried that my brother and I had a falling out because of my behavior with him, but honestly, it wasn't that serious. My brother is someone who avoids conflict and just told me he didn't think it was a good idea to interact further with him, either with revenge or anything like that, but it's not like he told me to apologize to them, or that he tried to cut me off. It wasn't that dramatic. Sorry if it came across that way, but it was just a suggestion, and neither he nor I consider it that important. Thomas and Rob haven't tried to contact me in the last few days, which I'm very grateful for, because I don't want anything to do with them, and just want some peace and quiet. I've moved out of the hotel I was staying at and am now at a friend's house. I hope no one tries to find me here. Update 2. It's been a couple of weeks, and Thomas and I are going to attend our first mediation session tomorrow. As I expected, he doesn't want to pay the amount I've requested in compensation, which is strange because, if for nothing else, he should at least offer to pay for the damages to my car that his son caused. It seems that he has forgotten the fact that he promised to return my money. Unfortunately, I didn't sign a contract or anything like that. But I do have several messages where he casually mentions that he would definitely pay back all the tuition I had paid as soon as he could. So, even though I don't have a contract, that will have to do for now. For everyone who has been asking why exactly I left the house, it's a rental house. Even though we had been trying to split the rent for the past few years, the lease was in his name, and I didn't think it was worth fighting over, so I left. I've been looking for an apartment near my workplace, and as soon as I find one, I'll move out of my friend's house and start living on my own again. I can't live with my brother because he has his own family, and even though they've told me I'm welcome in their home, I don't want anyone to have to give up their room for me. Anyway, that's how things stand for now, and I hope the divorce mediation ends soon so I can move on. I've already started actively trying to move on by focusing on my work, on other things, and trying to distract myself from Thomas. It's not easy, even though I know he was toxic for me, and it's best to let go. But a part of me will always have a weakness for him. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten to this point, and I'm dreading having to see him tomorrow. But I know it has to be done, and who knows, maybe he'll make a mistake, and I'll start to hate him. I'm just crossing my fingers that everything goes well. I'll probably be very busy over the next few months until the divorce is finalized, and I don't think I'll have time to keep you all updated on everything that's happening. So, if I post any other updates, it will definitely be after the divorce. Update 3. How long has it been? As I promised, I'm back after my divorce. My last update was about 7 months ago, and the divorce was finalized last week. Since then, life has been practically a non-stop party. These last few months have been very difficult and exhausting for me, but now that it's finally over, I've been spending a lot more time with friends and family. I'm also planning a trip to Greece with some of my high school friends. I've earned this treat for myself, and I'm going to try to enjoy life to the fullest. The divorce process was quite difficult and toxic, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but at least, in the end, I got back all the money that was owed to me. There's still more to come, as he couldn't pay me everything at once. Since then, Thomas has been playing the victim on social media, and most of our mutual friends have taken his side. They think I was too quick to ask for a divorce, and have been pretending that I never really loved him because it was so easy for me to leave him. They've also called me a gold digger and the most materialistic person they know because I claimed the money that was owed to me. I even had to fight tooth and nail for my money, which delayed the divorce even more. But in the end, I told him that if he didn't pay what he owed, I could sue Robbie and file a theft report, which wouldn't be very pleasant for him. He finally agreed, but don't think he liked any of this. I guess that makes me the villain, but I'm glad to know that these people have shown their true colors. I know for sure that they were never my real friends in the first place. I've cut ties with him and everyone who took his side during the divorce. I don't need this kind of negativity in my life, and as I said, I'm going to enjoy it to the fullest now. I have my friends, my family, and most importantly, I've found myself again. That's all I need. As for Robbie and Thomas, I know they've gotten back together. Or at least that's what I think. Because if they hadn't, Thomas wouldn't have agreed to pay everything, and we'd still be fighting over the divorce. I promise to find out more about the situation next week since I have a friend's birthday coming up, and I know there will be someone there who knows Thomas. Update 4. Finally, I was able to attend my friend's birthday last weekend. I'm glad I could distract myself a bit and enjoy the celebration because my friend and you all know how much I needed something like this after these last few months. During the party, I had an interesting conversation with one of the guests, who happens to know Thomas and Robbie. Although I don't want to give too many details in case Thomas might read this, I thought it would be worth sharing a bit of what I was told. It seems that after all the drama, the relationship between Robbie and Thomas has gone through many ups and downs. Although at first, after everything blew up, they seem to have made some attempts to get closer, the truth is that now they're distant again. Robbie had been hoping that Thomas would at least co-sign a student loan to help him with college, but Thomas isn't in a position to do so due to his debts and the closure of his business, which I'll talk about later. So, Robbie had to drop out of college because he doesn't have savings or anything to help himself. He had to get a job, as this person told me, and it wasn't enough to support himself while studying. He has never worked before, so he has no way to get a loan on his own without someone else's help. And yes, it seems that Thomas had to close his business, which has added even more stress to his financial situation. Now he has some personal debts that are unrelated to the failure of his business, because he had no money to live on all this time since his income source was my salary. But at least now he's working at a job, which isn't exactly what he had hoped for, but at least it's something. The only reason he agreed to pay me the money I claimed was because he hoped it would improve his relationship with Robbie. However, it seems that Robbie still doesn't want anything to do with him, despite Thomas's efforts. So, although it seems that Thomas has made some moves to try to fix things, the truth is that he hasn't had much success in improving his relationship with his son. I'm not surprised since Robbie has always seemed to be after the money. I even suspect that he was hoping to inherit Thomas's business, at least when he thought it was profitable. Now that all of that is gone, and his father can't even help him with a loan, he has cut ties with him. I also think my screenshots may have helped with this, or at least fanned the flames of the dispute. But it's true that Robbie seems to have overlooked these things if he was willing to fix things with his father in exchange for a loan. Anyway, I'm glad to be out of that family dynamic.